Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Recently, we saw news of a Muslim surrender treaty with the Zionists, known as the Drumlanrig Accord, which was presented to King Charles at Buckingham Palace. While many Muslims reacted negatively, it's concerning that others in the community have failed to understand the severity of this enormous act of betrayal. As a Shi'i, I was disturbed to see someone who claims to represent our community playing a central role in this surrender treaty, and that is none other than Sayyid Ali Abbas Razawi. He's referred to as a chief imam, but Razawi is a junior cleric and doesn't occupy a significant leadership role in the Shia community. Nevertheless, he has taken it upon himself to act not only as a representative between the Shia community and the British state, but also with the Zionists. In that self-appointed role, he wears clerical attire, the cloak and turban, which projects an image of religious authority. But to what does Razawi lend his apparently senior credentials? Because that is the important question. For many years, Razawi has been an active participant in the interfaith industry, which aims to transform Muslims into pacified supporters of the British state and to suppress their huge political potential. At face value, there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with interfaith. Isn't it okay, after all, to sit down and speak with the Ahl al-Kitab and other faith groups to foster positive community relations and understanding? Well, if that's all that interfaith were about, one would hardly be opposed to it. There's no problem with Muslims having respectful dialogues with people from other faiths, but the interfaith industry between Muslims and Zionist Jews is about pacification, because it aims to sign up Muslims to a Zionist political agenda, infiltrating Muslim communities by stealth. But why are Muslims a focus of Zionist interfaith? Well, Zionists consider the Muslim community, which is a potent force in support of Palestine, to be a threat, now more than ever. Israel's actions have caused global outrage and mass protests. Groups like Palestine Action have intensified pressure on the Zionist war machine, and Israel is becoming a pariah state. Zionists are afraid that public opinion has swung against Israel, so they want to suppress and pacify Muslim communities. That is the core purpose of the Zionist interfaith industry. So it's important to view this surrender treaty that Razawi drafted within that context. And this isn't his first offence. In May 2024, Razawi engaged with the World Jewish Congress, which is an international Zionist organization that supports Israel's genocidal actions. He attended a call with the Jewish Diplomatic Corps Academy, which is the WJC's lobbying wing. They train Zionists around the world to advocate for pro-Israel policies. Why did Razawi engage with such a group, speaking with Israel lobbyists in training? But we can go back further than 2024. Take, for example, Rabbi Joseph Dweck, who is one of the surrender treaty's signatories. Razawi can be traced working openly with this Zionist since at least 2018. Rabbi Dweck is an open supporter of the Zionist entity, the Israel occupation forces, and the Zionist expansionism of the Greater Israel Project. Similarly, Razawi has collaborated with Rabbi Moshe Rubin since at least 2021. After the Zionist regime began its genocidal onslaught against Gaza in October 2023, Rabbi Rubin spoke at a service of solidarity with Israel at Gifnik Synagogue. He later spoke staunchly in support of Israel at a public demonstration. Every rabbi involved in this treaty is a Zionist, including Rabbi Josh Levy, Rabbi Charlie Beginsky, and Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg. But worst of all, Razawi collaborated openly with Ephraim Mervis, the chief rabbi, who is an Israel lobbyist in all but name and one of the staunchest forces for the racist ideology of Zionism in Britain. Rabbi Mervis has for over a decade spoken publicly in defense of Israel. During the 2014 onslaught on Gaza, Mervis said that Israel's use of force was understandable and justifiable. He's also denied that Israel's recent actions in Gaza constitute a genocide, and he criticised the UK government in 2024 when it suspended a small percentage of arms licenses to the Zionist regime. His own son is also a member of the Israel occupation forces. This is the gang of racists with whom Razawi worked to produce the surrender treaty, which, from what I understand, was in discussion for a period of over 10 months. That means the treaty was being negotiated while the onslaught on Gaza and Lebanon was still happening. Now, let's keep our criticisms fair. Sometimes one must sit down and negotiate with one's enemies. This is normal and has happened throughout Islamic history. But a treaty should be assessed on its aims and necessity. One of Razawi's excuses for the treaty is that, according to him, the Shia community was under a lot of danger, and he wanted to protect it. From what I understand, at a recent private meeting with a handful of people from the London Shia community, Razavi explained that John Woodcock was overseeing a damaging investigation into the community. And so making this surrender treaty was one way to help protect the community against Woodcock's report. But who exactly is this character? John Woodcock, who these days calls himself Lord Walney, is a former MP who left the Labour Party in 2018, not long after sexual abuse allegations were made against him. In 2020, he was appointed by Boris Johnson as the government's supposedly independent advisor on political violence and disruption. He's long worked hand in glove with the Israel lobby, and he's also a strong supporter of the Saudi regime, even defending their criminal onslaught against Yemen. But really, he's a man with little influence. So how did he scare Razavi enough to think that the only solution was to appease him? If I were told that a chancer like Woodcock was planning to write an irrelevant report about the Shia community that nobody was going to read, I would have simply told him to take a hike. And subhanallah, only days ago, Woodcock was made redundant as the UK government abolished his job. So if Razavi thought this surrender treaty was necessary to protect us from a discredited pantomime villain like Woodcock, then that was misguided at best. Razavi also reportedly claimed that this treaty would shield Shia centres from the Charity Commission, which has targeted Shia charities under Israel lobby influence. Instead of exposing this partisan agenda or lobbying the government to stop this unjustified anti-Shia harassment, Razavi seemed to believe that submitting to Zionist authority in exchange for protection was a better idea. What a contrast to the lesson given by Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, who could have been spared the tragedy of Karbala had he simply given his bay'ah to Yazid, la'natullahi alayh. But we know the stance that our Imam alayhi salam took, and that was to say, hayhat minna dhillah. And yes, this situation can't be compared to Karbala, but our Husseini principles transcend time and context. They inform how we conduct ourselves, and pacification is not a Husseini principle. But okay, let's say for the sake of argument that none of this matters, because this treaty is simply about peace. Unfortunately, that's not the case. The text says, we acknowledge that tensions in the Middle East often have ripple effects on Muslim-Jewish relations locally. First, these aren't tensions. There is a genocide against the Palestinian people, and there is an ongoing onslaught against the Shia of Lebanon. The tensions are that tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people have been killed and maimed, and millions more have been displaced. And what are the ripple effects? If that refers to holding Zionists in Britain accountable for their active support of genocide and ethnic cleansing, then that is something to be supported, not condemned. The treaty also refers several times to anti-Semitism. But what is the definition of anti-Semitism? Because according to Zionists, practically anything pro-Palestine is anti-Semitic, and they make no distinction between Judaism and Zionism. In fact, Chief Rabbi Mervis has said, our Zionism is inseparable from our Judaism, and he said, I am a Zionist because I am a Jew. If Zionism and Judaism are the same, then according to that position, criticizing Israel and Zionism is anti-Jewish. That is the doctrine of the Zionists who signed this surrender treaty. And this is nothing we haven't seen before. It's simply the new anti-Semitism, which is a political tool that has been pushed by the Zionist regime for decades. In a 1972 speech, Israel's foreign minister, Abba Eban, said, the distinction between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is not a distinction at all. Anti-Zionism is merely the new anti-Semitism. So an ordinary person reading this document might think, this is just about tackling prejudice against Jews, when it's really about ending criticism of Israel and Zionism. But the surrender treaty gets even worse than that. It promises to create a Muslim-Jewish leadership council to supposedly mediate conflicts when global events affect local community relations. In other words, when Muslims are angered by Zionists in Britain who lobby for Israel, pressure the UK government to sell the Zionist regime weapons, fundraise for the Israel occupation forces, send their own sons and daughters to join the occupying army to kill Palestinian and Lebanese people, we should simply rely on this inconsequential council to discuss what we might do. Well, I'm sure the Zionists would love that. They'd much prefer that we stop protesting, stop campaigning, stop engaging in direct action to disrupt the Zionist war machine, and instead get into a room with Zionists to have a pointless discussion. That, after all, is the interfaith model. The council is also supposed to produce shared public statements during Middle East crises. In other words, Zionists will get to dictate the limits of acceptable Muslim expression and to legitimize Israeli barbarity. To make matters worse, the surrender treaty wants to target our children by seeking to encourage interfaith in schools and on university campuses. They want to brainwash Muslim youth into Zionist normalization. So what did the Muslim community gain from this? Razavi reportedly said that this treaty will help to tackle Islamophobia and Shiaphobia, but the transnational Zionist movement is instrumental in promoting Islamophobia worldwide and is currently engaged in a global war on the Shia, so it's hard to see how that would work. The treaty also seeks to separate what happens in the so-called Middle East from what happens in Britain. But Zionist charities and organizations across Britain are instrumental in supporting Zionist barbarism in Gaza and Lebanon. So what happens here does affect what happens over there. Now, to understand whose interests this surrender treaty serves is to look at who's praising it. The Jewish Chronicle, an Israel lobbying outfit, has so far dedicated 3 articles in support of the treaty. This is a paper that has called the Shia belief in Imam al-Mahdi Ajjalallahu Farajahu Sharif anti-Semitic. Yes, the Jewish Chronicle has printed that your belief in the 12th Imam is anti-Semitic. And these are the people supporting the surrender treaty. This document, which Razavi admits that he drafted, is simply detestable and unacceptable. He drafted and pursued this treaty in the name of the Shia of Britain, but it wasn't discussed or debated with representative stakeholders and senior leadership figures beforehand, and that's likely because it would have been rejected. And so this treaty must be opposed, both in words and in deeds, not just by the Shia community, but also by the wider Muslim community. Because it wasn't just Razavi who signed this document, but also other Muslim representatives, including 3 from the Sunni community, like the state asset Qari Asim. We must never accept the legitimacy of the Zionist regime, nor must we ever allow our Muslim communities in Britain to be infiltrated through Zionist normalization. I'm sure that Razavi genuinely convinced himself that what he was doing was correct, but the harm caused by his actions is immense, and his outrageous behavior must be met with a response. Our community organizations should make clear that they reject the Zionist interfaith industry and refuse to engage with it. Zionist normalizers should also not be given platforms. People who collaborate with oppressors cannot be allowed to sit on the minbar of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wasallam. Our job as a community is to safeguard the sanctities of Islam and its holy spaces. To do that, we must all make clear that there are red lines that cannot be crossed. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.